There's a big topic that has been under discussion in governments around the world. Global warming has the greatest minds looking into the impacts we can expect to see in the next 100 years. A large part of the carbon cycle that we have been looking into is the terrestrial carbon pool and whether that will increase or decrease over the next 100 years. We believe it will decrease. Today, we will explore the reasons behind the anticipated decline in the carbon cycle and why it is important for the future generations to come. The carbon cycle refers to the movement and exchange of carbon between the atmosphere, ocean, land, and organisms. The foundation elements of the carbon cycle are pools and fluxes. Pools are the storage areas that store carbon for periods of time, such as living organisms or oceans. Fluxes refer to the exchange of carbon within the carbon cycle, for example, photosynthesis or respiration. The primary fluxes between the atmospheric and terrestrial pools are respiration and photosynthesis. The current balance between these keep the terrestrial pool relatively steady without any major increase or decrease. This soon can change because the carbon emissions increasing the greenhouse effect are making the planet hotter. While the terrestrial pools has increased recently by about 3 petagrams due to fossil fuel emissions and land use changes, we believe that in 100 years, the total will actually decrease. The carbon sink caused by carbon emissions is an additional flux that was added into carbon cycle by humans. The overall change in the carbon cycle is an additional 11 petagrams of carbon due to land use changes and mostly carbon emissions. The terrestrial pool acts as a carbon sink, meaning that it stores some of the carbon from emissions instead of it all being added to the atmosphere. Roughly 3 of the 11 petagrams end up being in the terrestrial pool. This increase is most likely a temporary fix that we would argue that eventually the terrestrial pool will decrease in size. The first major cause to believe that the carbon pool will in fact decrease is global tree death. Majority of the carbon density in living organisms is found in trees, specifically tropical rainforests like the Amazon. However, there is research that shows by 2010 that the majority of the Amazon rainforest tree cover will be gone and replaced with grass cover. This is most likely due to a 5-year drought cycle that has become prevalent in recent years starting in 2005. Evidence shows that decrease in above ground biomass on average following the 2005 drought and continuing to decrease after the subsequent droughts. This drought-induced tree death could be due to the carbon starvation or hydraulic failure. These two ways that trees are likely to do in a drought are caused by stomatoconductance. If in a drought a stomata closes to keep retained water, then the plant will most likely die due to carbon starvation. While if a stomata remains open, the water column in the xylem of a tree can break and let in air bubbles due to transpiration and gravitational pressure, thus rendering the tree unable to get water from the roots to the leaves. There is also an increased land use change, especially from deforestation, which dramatically decreases the carbon cycle because deforestation destroys trees and other vegetation life that serves as carbon sinks. When this occurs, it releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Another big indicator that the terrestrial carbon pool might decrease is permafrost melt. The area most affected by global warming is the Arctic Circle. This region contains the largest amounts of carbon soil density due to permafrost. The increasing temperatures in the northern part of the globe are melting this permafrost, allowing them for microorganisms to break down organic material and through respiration release the stored carbon back into the atmosphere. The biggest issue with this is that the carbon has remained trapped in the permafrost, is very concentrated, and acts as a very powerful greenhouse, thus speeding up the process of global warming in the cycle. This release of carbon that has been trapped in soil will significantly reduce the soil carbon density and thus overall decrease the terrestrial carbon pool. The final point we will cover today is the speed at which genetic mutations are able to take place and be passed along in reproduction. This is important to how living things, in the case trees, are able to adapt to changing climates. There is research that shows in order for trees to keep up with the climate change, they must be able to migrate 1,000 meters a year. They must move north due to the increased temperatures threatening southern tree populations in warming climates. Research was done specifically looking at spruce trees and thus their migration patterns over centuries of global warming, moving from southern parts of the United States to the more northern regions of Canada. It is important to study evolution in tree types to predict how or if they are able to adapt to these changing conditions. In this case, indicating the tree movement will actually be too slow to keep up with the climate change. Overall, the net carbon decrease in the terrestrial pool will be due to the fact that respiration flux will vastly outweigh the photosynthesis flux, and thus over time the carbon pool will decrease while the atmospheric pool only grows, increasing the global temperatures. This decrease in the photosynthesis flux will most likely be due to the large decrease in the global tree population as the warming problem takes on a high death toll. The next 100 years could show a terrestrial carbon decrease due to the information today that we provided.